Hi everyone.
Hi. Hello.
Hello. Oh, hello. Yeah, I'm Keith Livingston. I'm a recently retired chiropractor, and I owe my long-term health following a theoretically terminal brain tumour 12 years ago to following the diet we're talking about tonight, which is basically a low-carb, moderate protein, moderate fat diet with plenty of greens and coloured vegetables. So it's a diet where you don't miss out on anything, you never get hungry, and you just get healthy and well and lose weight. Okay, today's subject is the microbiome. It's that most of the cells in our body aren't our own. A lot of the DNA in our body, if you're talking about different strains of DNA, is totally foreign to the human body. And it's made up of the DNA, which is in trillions and trillions of cells. And the number of cells that aren't our own compared to our own much smaller cells are all bacterial. Most are good, or good for us, or beneficial, and a few are pathogenic or harmful. But so I've called them alien cells because that's just a hook, just to get people interested. So we can be seen as a vast cooperative collective of trillions of cells with thousands of distinct species, thousands and thousands, each with its own distinct DNA and its own contribution to the health and well-being of the super colony it serves. So we're like jellyfish, really, because they're colonies of all kinds of cooperative cells that work in with each other. So under the primacy of our own human DNA, which organises everything, but all these little colonists each have a specific role to play in our biology. This is a big point. Your gut microbiome is as unique as a fingerprint. So just like my fingerprint, it's not the same as anyone's in this room. Microbiologists have actually done this. A family can move into a completely sterile environment, and within hours, say the top of the kitchen benches will be colonised by the family microbiome. And a good microbiologist can go in there with microbial genomics and sequence the DNA of those bacteria and tell you what they are. Yeah. So we inherit our microbiome at birth because when we're in the womb, the whole of the oral fecal route, the gut, is completely sterile. But we inherit our mother's microbiome through a messy, normal vaginal birth. You know, all the mother's feces, they're supposed to, in nature, smear the baby. It's called fecal smearing. And that's how we get our mother's microbiome. Now, to talk about the deep dark secrets of the gut, we've got to go right down into the gut. You can see here, that's the lumen, or the centre of the gut. All around there is the mucosa, which is just the lining of the gut itself. There are blood vessels here. These are arterioles, and the blue ones are veins coming into the gut wall. These are all the smooth muscles. There's circular muscles and longitudinal muscles, which together squeeze foodstuffs through your bowel, like squeezing sausage meat through a sausage. Okay? I don't know if you can see clearly these little projections into the lumen or whole of the bowel itself, but they're tiny little fronds. They're called the villi, and they greatly increase the surface area of the bowel, so that maybe if you think of that as being like a 20-foot long tube, it's curling around. Just the curling around in the gut makes it longer and more surface area. But in theory, if you had a length of bowel like a 2-inch pipe, and it was 20 feet long, its surface area might be only a couple of square metres. But with all the little folds and increases in surface area, the net surface area exposed to passing nutrients can be as much as the equivalent of several football fields. So it vastly increases the ability of the body to absorb nutrients. Here's a close-up of the villi. As you can see here, they project into the lumen, it's called, the lumen of the intestine. At their base, they've got the little veins and arterioles, capillaries. This is called the mucosal area here, and this is the submucosa. So the mucosal cells produce types of mucus which coat the surface of the villi, and especially in the case of the stomach or near the stomach, where all the hydrochloric acid's produced to basically, first part of digestion involves hydrochloric acid, which is quite a strong acid. It stops these getting damaged. Now, I'll talk a bit here about leaky gut, because I've talked about this before. A leaky gut is not a medical term, it's a non-medical term, but it's getting more recognised medically. Of course, it takes about a century for anything to get recognised medically. Excessive sugar intake is a huge cause of gut problems. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs like ibuprofen, they can just cause enormous problems and inflammation all through your gut. And excessive alcohol intake, that's no one here, is it? No. Very popular these days to have the old red wine at night, you know, and mother's little helper, isn't it?
That's a white.
Oh, is that a white wine, is it? Oh, okay. Oh, gin, okay.
That's the naturopath.
All right. Yeah, so the problems we're dealing with are inflammation, and rampant inflammation is terrible. Inflammation is like having a machine gun with very high energy particles or electrons, which are just like a scatter gun, just really damage all the membranes of all the cells in your gut and in the rest of your body. And we talked a couple of weeks ago about central obesity, or TOFI. Sounds like tofu, but TOFI, TOFI, that's thin outside, fat inside. Central obesity is a terrible problem, or visceral fat, obstructing and lining the outside of the stomach and pushing the other organs up. The liver gets fat, it's fatty liver, and this is associated with high carbohydrate intake. It just deposits as fat in the liver and gums up the works. These are the possible effects of this leaky gut. Gut is leaky and bacteria and toxins enter the bloodstream. It can cause widespread inflammation and possibly trigger a reaction from the immune system. Supposed symptoms of leaky gut include bloating, food sensitivities, fatigue, digestive issues, and skin problems. Chronic leaky gut symptoms may be associated with chronic fatigue syndrome, migraines, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, food sensitivities, thyroid abnormalities, mood swings, skin conditions, and autism. And you could probably add a few more to that list if you like, want to be creative. But none of these are conventionally recognised in orthodox medicine, really. There's a close-up of this entity which doesn't really exist. 1,000 times magnification of a leaky gut. You can see all these little crypts here. Well, they're not supposed to be there. They're just ulcerated and pitting sores, really. And it's caused by very high glucose levels within the gut from too much carbohydrate, acidic environment in the gut, all kinds of rubbish foods cause this, and stress and inflammation. And this is an overview from what we're talking about. So all these things on the top here are some of those things which will cause the gastrointestinal inflammation, which tends to get in between these cells here. These are in the intestine, they're in the mucosa. So you can see the little villi there, and it's managed to separate cells from each other. So there's free entry through those little holes you see into the submucosa, which has got all kinds of little blood vessels and ways of the blood system to deliver those toxins and poisons and putrefying food products all around the body. Now this is going very deep in. If we go deep into the gut, you'll see here, and for Debbie's sake, we're looking at the villi close up, and there's a lump in the middle of the villi, which is called a lymph node. And everyone's heard of lymph nodes? Yeah. So you've got them in your gut, all through your gut. And so the whole length of your gut is basically a huge contributor to your immune system. And if we fly in closer, this is a cross-section of these villi and that lymph node. There's a lymph node there. These are little arterioles, or very fine capillaries to the villi, and you can see how the surface area of that's got access to food particles and things going past. What happens in real life is there's a layer of mucus across the top which sort of keeps everything sort of trapped in there. But these lymph nodes eventually drain through these lymph channels back into the central lymphatic system, which basically eventually drains back into the blood, but it's like a filter. And it's, what makes up the lymph system are white blood cells which neutralise and help detoxify your body and kill off any pathogenic invasive bacteria. Now this is amazing. None of this was known when I was studying, which is a while ago now. There are cells in the submucosa of your intestine that talk to other cells and mediate your immune response. So this one's called a dendritic cell because that's the dendrite there, and it looks like a periscope, right? So that's actually a type of immune cell called a dendritic cell, which comes up just underneath the mucosal cells here, puts up a periscope, and into that mucus layer there, these little white flecks are bacteria or pathogens or food particles, but it just does a little test, a little chemical test, like you test your pool chemicals. And that information goes back to the cell here. Then that goes out to another cell and meets another one called a T lymphocyte, and it exchanges its information. It's just amazing, and creates antibodies for whatever that is that it's detected. But it's also detecting, what's the salt balance in the what's coming through the gut. Is there enough salt in here? Is there enough of what I need? And you can see that's the top of the periscope. Has a good old gander. They literally, I've seen actual video footage through an Electron microscope of these things, and they do just poke their little head up and then they go down again. Yeah, like a little snake head. Yeah. So the human gut has over 100 million nerve receptors along its length that communicate within milliseconds. So when we talk about that dendritic cell, that was just floating in the submucosa below the villi in the lining of the gut. And you'd think, well, it just exchanges its information with these other cells and then that gets into the bloodstream. And that's called the humoral or cell-mediated response to threats to the body. But what was never known until very recently was that the gut is aware of what's going on within milliseconds of any perceived threat that's floating in the gut. The chyme or the pre-digested food or the digesting food. And it does that through the parasympathetic nervous system. So these 100 million nerve receptors communicate with a very powerful calming down part of our nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system via a major cranial nerve called the 10th cranial nerve or the vagus nerve, and that communicates with the brain stem, which then communicates with higher brain centres and lets you, if need be, your thinking brain know what's going on, but most of it's done automatically or autonomically in the nervous system through the autonomic nervous system. and you never know about it. So 60% of the brain at any one time is fully occupied with what is happening in the gut. So some people say that it's actually another brain, or acts like another brain. And we've all got this in our language, like, gut reaction, I felt it in the pit of my stomach, or, gut reaction, visceral response is another one, So the gut bacteria, they also communicate with the human brain. In fact, there's the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's responsible for basically your organs and glands in many ways, just making it all relaxed and calm so that you digest your food, and all the things that are supposed to be produced by the body can do that in a calm way. And this one is the absolute opposite. That's called the sympathetic nervous system. The trouble with the sympathetic nervous system, it's not very sympathetic. It's your alarm system. It's all, hell's bells and let's react to this, So when people get too stressed out and too hard driving at work or whatever they're doing, this is an overdrive all the time, and then it produces alarm hormones like cortisol, which is necessary for the survival of the organism in short bursts. But if it keeps doing that all day, it makes for a sick puppy. Now this is the brain electron microscope of the brain. That's a blood vessel in the brain, and these are all these cells around that blood vessel. That's the lumen of the blood vessel, and you can see like the gut, it's got smooth muscle around it, being an arteriole. That's to help squeeze the blood or pump the blood through the brain. But this little collection of cells here, with their cell nuclei, they're clearly bacterial cells they're clearly bacterial cells to a microbiologist, and recognisable as the various species. They're actually ones of 3 different types that are recognised in the gut: Firmicutes, Proteobacteria, and Bacteroidetes. So I hope there are no microbiologists in here to correct me. Good. Okay. So how do they get to sit there in the brain? There's no inflammation or fibrosis or anything to suggest they're causing any problem there, but they're just in the brain, at the other end of those nerve pathways eventually. Somehow they got there, travelling up the fluid of the nerves, up the exoplasmic fluid. So it's all one unit. So I think Lois wanted to know this the other week.
Yeah.
Prebiotics and probiotics. We've all heard of them. What are they and what do they do? So prebiotics, in a way, they're what the good bacteria, which are the probiotics, live in. It's a home for the prebiotics. So your beneficial bacteria or probiotics, they tend to break down and proliferate amongst very complex plant carbohydrates. So we've heard of sugars. Well, you know about simple sugars and glucose and how that's no good for you, but very complex sugars like cellulose, very long, starchy ones which are very hard to digest except for specific bacteria which are more or less designed to do just that job very slowly. So they will release energy very slowly when they're allowed to, and they occupy those little crypts in between the villi, all these bacteria. And funnily enough, or the way it's designed maybe, beneficial bacteria tend to proliferate in complex carbohydrates or plant-based fibres or fibres, and harmful pathogenic ones, they just love the simple stuff. They love sugar. So if you want to muck up your whole ecosystem in your gut, just get into the sugar, I get horrified when I see people who, cola is shocking. Well, actually, just a little can of Coke, a little 375ml can of Coke's got, I think, 12 teaspoons of sugar. So you know how much, I think we've talked about this before, How much sugar does your body run off at any one time? How much? Well, we only need 5 milligrams of glucose in our whole body at any one time, or 1 teaspoon of sugar. So that's just like the song, just a teaspoon of sugar. Our whole body runs off a teaspoon of sugar. So if you go and have a little Coke down the hatch, you've just done 1,200% increase in what you should be having there. So that then brings in a hormone called insulin, and that's got the sole job of getting rid of that sugar out of the bloodstream.
It's working really hard.
Oh, your pancreas gets exhausted. It's keeping on having to pump this stuff in there, and then you get pancreatic exhaustion, which is a precursor to pancreatic cancer. You know, because if organ systems get exhausted, then they can't. The turnover of their cells from the stem cells, their DNA within that organ gets disrupted and it can't express itself properly. So
that cell changes?
Yeah, it becomes dysplastic, and dysplasia is a earliest form of a cancer. So it goes dysplasia, then metaplasia, which is a change, and then full-blown cancer.
Yeah.
So that's just a failure to function, really.
Yeah.
Now, prebiotic foods are basically lean and green, or mean and green. Broccoli's a brilliant one. Cauliflower's another one, even though it's not green, but it's a great substrate for all the good, healthy, beneficial probiotic bacteria. Okay? And probiotic foods are basically fermented foods. So apple cider vinegar is one, kombucha is another one, sauerkraut.
But I've been making kombucha.
Good.
So, yeah.
Had any exploding bottles?
No?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so they're basically the probiotic foods, and they're just loaded with the beneficial bacteria, which if you're eating enough fibre or greens or what we have on the plan is quite often something like spinach leaves on the plate, just raw, and then a couple of poached eggs on top, and then grated cheese on top of that, and maybe a bit of Himalayan salt, which is loaded with 80 trace minerals.
And some crispy fried bacon.
And some crispy fried bacon.
Yum.
Yeah. But in those greens, you just created a nice prebiotic ecology for the probiotics you have at other times to do their stuff. And your body just loves the balance created by a healthy gut flora. Oh, we'll finish the talk. The next talk is what is insulin resistance and why is it so important?
Night?
Yep.
So have I missed a talk?
You've missed a few, actually.
So how come I haven't seen them before?
I don't know.